Colleagues and my dear students. A very warm welcome to this very special session on the Indian roots of American Enlightenment. This is indeed a very special session because the format is different from what we've had so far. We'll be having a fireside chat, but of course without real fire because we do not want to violate fire protocols. We don't want alarms buzzing everywhere. But I'm sure we will see some fireworks in this conversation between our eminent guests. Before I move on to the task of introducing our guests, let me request our Dean, Professor Mattu, to present two mementos as tokens of our affection to our two guests. Lotpal.
It's very heavy. Yes, sir.
One for you also, sir.
No, not to
Yes.
insider. No. You're also.
They are just opening it.
No. Then most certainly not. No. Honestly. It's embarrassing. Either way, it is wrong.
Okay.
He's my Guruji. So
infamously calls me Guruji everywhere, yes.
Anybody who's the last student of Professor Matilal is a guru to all.
So kind.
Guru to all.
Yes.
Okay, without further ado, let me introduce you to our moderator and our guests. Our moderator for the day is Dr. Saumyajit Ray. He's an assistant professor of US Studies at the Center for Canadian, US and Latin American Studies. His areas of interest within the US include conservatism and conservative movements, Christianity and the Christian ethos, evangelism, American Judaism, language, ethnicity and politics. Beyond the United States, he specializes on Jewish-Christian relations and Judeo-Christian theological conflicts, Islam and Islamism, Shia Islam, post-Soviet communism, Sikhism, Sikh politics and Sikh militancy. And I, for one, being from his center, I cannot think of a better moderator for this session. Welcome, sir. Our guest for this afternoon is Shri Rakesh Kaul. Mr. Kaul is an Indian-American author and the author of the best-selling historical drama, The Last Queen of Kashmir, brought out by Harper & Collins in 2016. He is a Granthika speaker specializing in Niti storytelling and a writer for major newspapers on the evolutionary forces within history, culture, and society which lead to individual empowerment. He was a founding contributor to the first chair of India Studies at the University of California, Berkeley, to the Center for the Advanced Study of India at the University of Pennsylvania, and to the Mattu Center for India Studies at State University of New York. He has served as the co-chairman for the Arts of Kashmir exhibition, Asia Society, New York, in 2008. In conversation with, welcome, sir.
Thank you.
In conversation with him is Professor Heeraman Tiwari.
Center for Historical Studies.
From the Center for Historical Studies. Are you sure, sir?
That's the JD, that's it. More.
Okay. With that, I hand over the mic to our moderator, Dr. Ray.
Thank you, Uma. Very good afternoon to all of you, my dear students and colleagues and Dean sir, and everyone else. So I am in august company, on both right and left. And but I would not fire away right and left. That's not, it's not my day. So the Indian roots of American Enlightenment, when I saw the topic, it evoked a lot of, interest in when I was told by my chairperson that this was the topic. But I would like to know more about this from you and from you too, and let's keep it in a conversational style. But why was I so interested? Because I was given to understand, which I teach my students year after year, that America was settled by immigrants from Europe in the early 17th century with a very Christian purpose, with a very Protestant purpose. Whether they were the Pilgrims at Plymouth or whether they were the Puritans at Jamestown, the purpose had been to worship God in our own way. That's a very Protestant thing. When the separatists, they left the Church of England, and America would be the country where they would have that freedom. So religious freedom was one of the primary, in fact, I believe that it was the primary reason why they crossed the Atlantic. And, the Mayflower Compact, one of the first written documents which they wrote before they alighted from the ship, Mayflower, on American soil. So I try to keep this more conversational, Rakesh sir and Heeraman sir. So I'd begin with you. You can begin your presentation. Thank you.
So around 1844, but no, let me thank you, sir, for inviting me. I had the privilege as a young boy having the eminent Hriday Nath Kunzru come to our home for dinner. I remember him vividly as a very spry, energetic individual, mover and shaker, vibrating with intensity. He honored us then, and I feel very privileged to return that honor today. So, around 1844, Emerson asked a very provocative question: what is the essence of America? And this question was inevitable, and we see that today in India. There's always a time delay between political freedom and the state of individual sovereignty. They had overthrown their colonial masters, the British. They wanted to walk away from European Enlightenment. But where to go? The Walt Whitman Center had invited me to give a talk on his birth anniversary about a year ago. And I proposed some fairly radical thesis, which I was very happy that there was tremendous receptivity, so much so that my talk was then taken by the Consul General and shared with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Walt Whitman was the end of that stream of consciousness that began with Emerson, Thoreau, and many other philosophers in Harvard and others that you know about. And when you read Leaves of Grass, and Walt Whitman was a seminal poet, or A Passage to India, there are four remarkable things that come out. One is the notion of Swatantra. In American notion, the self-reliance, in Abhinav Gupta's notion, Swatantra. I am sovereign. And that's still today very much an American trait. The second notion is, sir, to your point about Christianity, the body pure. The country was founded on a framework where the body is impure and full of sin. And yet, when you read Walt Whitman, here's what he says. If anything is sacred, the human body is sacred. And if the body were not the soul, what is the soul? The man's body is sacred and the woman's body is sacred. No matter who it is sacred. Is that Shankaracharya singing this? And if you don't stop there and say, give me more, he says, divine am I inside and out, and I make holy whatever I touch, or am touched from. I hear and behold God in every object, yet not understand God in the least. Is that a Kashmir Shavite or an American? His idea of a cosmic man was no different than the Indic perception. And when you study him, he was as observant of his body as he was of nature. And when I made the proclamation that he was America's first tantric, it was not because I was just, indulging in a flight of fancy. It was his words. Maurice Buck, who wrote a book on cosmic consciousness, which I studied 54 years ago, and was a student of Walt Whitman, says, I've heard him speak of hearing the grass grow and the trees coming out in leaf. But in his own poem and book, Specimen Days, Whitman sings, there is a scent in everything. Even in the snow, no two places hardly any 2 hours anywhere exactly alike. How different the odor of the noon from midnight, winter from summer, or a windy spell from a still one. No different than what Sadhguru would say. Turn on Sadhguru's videos and he'll say, I can see the fragrance in the air. So I'll stop there because there's so much to talk about. But I will make one more addition before I turn it over, before I forget. The last speaker, Professor Soni, talked about China, talked about Buddhism. I've been traveling to China for the last 35 years. I was the sponsor of the first exhibition that was held in the Imperial Palace. They wanted to open it up to the world. At one time, the Chinese government didn't have money. I put up the money for that, so I went as a state guest. But last year I told Sushma, I said, Sushma, I've been going to China for 35 years. Come, I'll take you to China with me. And I built an itinerary, probably the only human being on earth. I said, we will go to the Imperial Palace Buddhist temples of China. These were all built on the border between China and Mongolia, the subject of the last discussion. And these temples were built fresh each time when the Chinese government was negotiating with a particularly troublesome Mongolian warlord. So they would build this temple in his honor, the Mongolian warlord would come, and they would then parley in this Buddhist temple. I went to all the major ones with Sushma. Two things are striking and important from a research point of view for all of you young people. One is this, and I have close to 1,000 photographs to support what I am now going to share. What I'm going to share. Every Buddhist temple certainly has Buddhas. You climb up, you go. What do you see in the inner sanctum sanctorum? In the inner sanctum sanctorum of all these Buddhist temples is a rendition of what Professor Amitabh Mattu presented to me. It is a Devi. It could be Saraswati. It could be Sharika, the 18-armed one from Kashmir. It could be 1,000-armed Devi. These are all Devi temples. Point 2 for you students. I've been going to the various temples in China. Every time I go to a temple. Would always see 3-year-old women lighting incense. This time, the crowds in these temples exceeded the crowds that you see in Tirupati and Jagannath Puri. I lost my wife in one of the temples. For 2 hours, I led the most miserable existence. Why do I say that? There is a wave that is starting in China. We have to outreach to it. So with that, I stop and I turn it over.
Before Heeraman says start speaking, what I gather is that an individual, if the wife is out of sight, can have a horrible existence, even if it is for 2 hours. Yeah.
Your wife in China.
So, thank you, Saumyajit. But first of all, I want to begin with 2 apologies and then 2 thanks. My apology, and which is more or less it is coming out of some little silly childish triumph. This is the very first time that I'm going to speak before this august audience called School of International Studies. I find myself absolutely out of place. I have nothing to do with international relations except that I'm interested in it. I keep trolling on social media people who talk about it. So that is one apology. The second apology is that I am a student of philosophy and Sanskrit and history by default. So therefore, whatever I'm going to say, if it doesn't make sense, you must forgive me. And my 2 thanks are naturally to Professor Amitabh Mattu, who is a dear old friend, nearly 4 decades now, and with him is sitting another intimidating intellectual and who again, I think at the same time we met in the late 80s. And since then we know each other. Our subjects do not match much, except that Amitabh Mattu makes me even more nervous because he has written a book on the Bhagavad Gita on which I should be an expert. But Professor Varun Sahni, of course, has a very ecclesiastical interest from South America to India. So among these international specialists and intimidating intellectuals, I dare speak. And the second thank is that, of course, I am in the company of a great writer and poet. I admire them because all poets are Vyogis. As some great Hindi poet has said, Vyogi hoga pehla kavi, आह से उपजा होगा गान, उमड़कर आँखों से चुपचाप बही होगी कविता अनजान. And that is a tribute to Valmiki, who obviously got the poetry first time. And we believe, and I happen to believe, more I read and more older I get, to believe that he must be really the first poet, because he curses a hunter whose job it is to hunt to earn his bread and butter. Why should he do that? Manishada pratishtam tamagama shashwati samaha yatkauncha mithunadekam avadhihi kama mohitam. You have killed only one of the 2 birds. That is the choice that a poet has. The poet does not have any distinguishing, unlike us, differentiating knowledge, which leads me to the subject of enlightenment. Now, I am not either an expert, and also I do not have any inclination to compare India with anything. I happen to believe India is unique. Whether American Enlightenment, or for that matter, its predecessor from where it learnt, European one, beginning from the Renaissance in the 15th century, Florence, then traveling through France and Germany, and by the middle of 18th century, Enlightenment is settled down. In these 400-500 years, all of them are struggling and wrestling with the idea how actually to celebrate reason. Did Europe or European thinkers not celebrate reason? Because everybody, expects happiness. When a long time ago, I read it, and that's why I'm carrying this 40-year-old book with me. And I thought, let me browse, because my memory as I'm getting older is fading. Because amnesia is considered to be cursed. I do not believe in that. But memory is also something that keeps us alive, culturally, civilizationally. And then I was reminded of none other than Amartya Sen. Why was I reminded of him? Because he's the one who I thought invaded my subject. He opens his book, Development as Freedom, which is cited as the first book in his Nobel Prize, with a story which comes from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. And of course, he mistranslates or rather paraphrases for his benefit because he has an audience in Washington to deal with, or maybe the wider audience. To me, somebody who is stickler to the text and poetry, but nevertheless he gets the sense of it by opening, and he ends that book. Go and have a look at it with Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, and he is fascinated by Maitreyi. Yajnavalkya is now believed to be absolutely satisfied with his life. He says, here it is, I have established this beautiful institution, which you call today university, and you guys have been teachers enough, so one of you can appoint yourself as vice chancellor. This literally happens in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, and I am off to my fourth stage. And here it is that I am paraphrasing, and one of the wives, the cleverer one, or maybe more, vocal one, Maitreyi, hangs on to his dhoti and says, before you leave, you must answer my question. And the word that she asks are, Sukhi bhavishyami, will I be happy? Because until the 13th century or early 14th century, in Europe, people were very, very happy, it seems, with the biblical narrative and what was happening. But there was a volatility under the surface, which you could see in the writings, whatever I have been able to read, and I can tell you, I'm not boasting, read quite a lot, much more than I would have read in India. But there, Maitreyi says, if I had the wealth of the entire nation, because wealth is a symbolism of happiness, which all of us, of course, accept. This is the Upanishad written sometime around 8th century BC. If not earlier. The reason why I say this, because this is also the Upanishad which is cited by the Buddha among the 6 Upanishads from which he quotes. He cites this. And so, if I had the wealth of the entire universe, will I be happy? Sukhi bhavishyami. The response is very curt and very affectionate. He said, yes, Maitreyi, you will be happy if you had the wealth of the entire universe or world, but only as much as the richest people of the universe are. However, the sukha that you're looking for, which later on the Buddha expands more reasonably and logically, he said that sukha atma avare drashtabhyaha, shotavyaha, mantavyaha, nididhyasitavyaha. And from inner Asia, therefore, you enter the inner world of your mind, and they say, Atma avare drashtabhyaha. You only look at yourself, within you. And it is here, and then he says, Shotabhyaha, you must hear it. You must hear yourself, listen to yourself, if not hear. If you can listen to yourself, it is better, but at least hear. And then nididhyasitavyaha. Then meditate, ruminate it, ponder it. And then perhaps you can ask this question, and then I shall come back. Now, I would just, I'll close very quickly, and then I'll come back to lots of European thinkers who have discussed. And that's why you can see that I'm not touching this comparative anxiety of what enlightenment is greater and what is not. To me, my enlightenment is greater, if that can be described in the word enlightenment. That the Upanishads already in the 8th century BC, they are a storytelling method of communicating enlightenment, happiness. They're also, they are the texts, in my opinion, and if my opinion can be counted at the age of 63, is that they are very, very simple. They open with most simple questions. Look at this Upanishad. It's like a husband and wife having a conversation in the second last week of the month. How much money is left? Which child wants an iPad? Or whatever it is. And that is the conversation that Maitreyi is initiating in order to graduate the discussion to the level where you really have to look within. In other words, it is the question that matters in terms of celebration of reason, and almost every single Upanishad begins with a question, ends with a question, so much so that one Upanishad among the many is simply called Prashnopanishad. It is nothing but questions and questions. So if you have the capacity and the generosity to ask question of yourself, if not others, so that is one part. And I'll conclude by quoting another great author, scholar, whom we all swear by in Indian modern universities, those of us who teach or receive wisdom in English, is Immanuel Kant. He settles down the matter because before that, in the 13th century already, Thomas Aquinas had tried to establish that the wisdom that has been derived, we have misunderstood, and therefore we need to understand it. And in the 17th and 18th century in particularly, and when you come to the 18th century, Joseph Le Bastre of France, he wants to answer those radicals, he calls them, who had begun to shun the biblical knowledge and latched onto the new world and new knowledge which came in the form of enlightenment. Immanuel Kant tries to settle it down in a way that I think makes much sense to us and to me in particular, and let me quote him. Enlightenment is a man's emergence from his self-incurred immaturity. And then there are several sentences, and there's immaturity is the inability to use one's own understanding without the guidance of another. And several other sentences, and then I end his paragraph, long paragraph. The motto of enlightenment is therefore sapre aude, that is, have courage to use your own understanding. Thank you.
Heeraman sir, you were saying, let me conclude. We don't want you to conclude.
No, this is my then.
Okay. So I'll just, in passing, I'd like to say when you talk about poets, all the Sikh gurus were marvelous poets, and their compositions are found in the Holy Guru Granth Sahib. So that's one that reminded me when you talk about poets. Two other things that I heard in your speech was, one was reason, the other was happiness. So the Protestant Reformation started the age of reason in Europe.
So
and
enlightenment.
In my opening remarks, I said that America was settled with a very Protestant purpose. Apart from religious freedom, reason was the one. As far as happiness is concerned, the Declaration of Independence already had life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Fine. So before I move on to Rakesh sir, you were talking about enlightenment. But let me draw your attention to a series of movements that started in early 18th century, known as the Great Awakenings in the United States. They were the ones which gave rise to the evangelicals in America. Fine. So, there is difference in scholarly opinion where there are 3 Great Awakenings or 4 Great Awakenings, but it all started in the 18th century, 1730 to be particular. Now, when you talk about that was for the collective redemption of Americans, because when we say that a person has sinned, the redemption is to be born again in Christ. Fine. And so, and that is from there we get the name born agains. And one of the born agains had even become president of the United States, that's George W. Bush. Fine. So, how do you look at the Great Awakenings or the enlightenment that you are talking about in the context of the Great Awakenings, sir?
I'm going to make 4 points. Reason, awakening, enlightenment, and I'm going to segue right into the School of International Studies and International Relations, because that's why you're here. I have a very brutal definition of awakening, which was handed to us by Abhinav Gupta 1,000 years ago.
More than 1,000 years ago.
We celebrated his anniversary a couple of years ago. Now, everybody associates Abhinav Gupta with Shiv Shakti, consciousness, Tantra Loka. and they miss what he's all about. Kashmir Shaivism is not about any of the things that other schools promise. Redemption, sin, this, paradise. Kashmir Shaivism is about lok vyahar. They're trying to answer a very fundamental question of human existence, that of transactions. How do the daily transactions of life happen? This worldly view not only distinguishes it from Advaita Vedanta and other schools, but is very unique. And Abhinav Gupta is very brutal. He says, I don't care what philosophy you have, what belief you have, if it cannot help me understand worldly transactions, it's no good. And so when you look at the foundations of Kashmir Shaivism, Lok Vyavahara, it starts with Vak Devi, sonic consciousness, because if you can't communicate, you can't have a transaction. And what I would submit to you is this is the only definition of enlightenment we should start with. Because this is objective. This stands to reason. This stands to universal analysis. But it is now very important. Because this enlightenment is now so important to the survival of the human race. Any other definition of enlightenment is going to lead us to extinction. Because those are exclusivist beliefs. Those are exclusivist beliefs. So Loka Vyavahara brings us to two very powerful foundational words. One of which I would respectfully submit should be right there alongside Satyam, Shivam, Sundaram. And that is the idea of Sambandh. When people say to me, what school do you belong to? Are you a Kashmir Shaivite? I say, I'm a Sambandhi. Sambandh. And in Kashmir, 1,000 years went into creating rasa theory. Rasa is the ultimate form of creating Sambandh. But there were all kinds of other Sambandh technologies developed. Today we talk in terms of hard power, soft power. I'm sure when I look at your brochure, there'll be military cooperation, political, economic, cultural. But our body of knowledge on Sambandh is so vast, and all our diplomats should be armed with it. Now I'll address the question that was raised earlier. Did we expel Buddhism? Well, I don't know about that, but I sure know is that we were the savior of Buddhism. I sure know that there was one Indian sitting in San Francisco who, along with a friend, while on the board of the Asian Art Museum, sponsored the first Art of Tibetan exhibition when we were threatened by a mighty power that if we went ahead, they would make our lives so miserable we would wish we had never been born. And we used that exhibition as a way to bring the Dalai Lama into the United States. He came to the United States, and then that became the basis to get him to meet the President of the United States of America, and the rest is history. So as long as one Indian has Buddhism in his heart, India has Buddhism in its heart. But this idea of Sambandh, and a subset idea in Sambandh, Sparsh, how do you create touch? These foundational questions occupied our thinkers, certainly in Kashmir, but are not occupying us. Now I'll give you an example of Sparsh, a Sparsh movement. Sushma and I, we were traveling through the Baltic states. We were in Slovenia. There's a great restaurant. I can't get in. I go to the concierge. I'm a storyteller, so I don't really quote text. I can quote text, but I like stories. So I tell the concierge, hey, can you get us in this restaurant? You gotta have pull. And she says, yes, sir. And she calls and she speaks in the language. And they all say, okay, yeah. Suddenly a table has opened up. So she turns to me. What name should I make the reservation in? I say, it's Mr. Kaul, Kaul. She says, oh, okay. And she goes into the phone and she says, K-A-U-L. I'm listening to her. And then she smiles at me and says, it's all set. Mr. Kaul, it's all set. I run out. I call up Padma Shri Subhash Kak. I said, Subhash, this is what happened to me. He said, yeah. He said, I'm going to set you up for dinner with these two Sanskrit Slovenian professors. And we had that night dinner. And they walked us through 30% of the Slavic languages are Sanskrit root words. And I called up the consul general in New York. I said, what is the foreign ministry doing? Where are our consul generals? Please open a consulate here. Let's start the process going. So there are, and by the way, in these Slavic countries, there's a rebellion taking place. These people are saying, before this thing came from Palestine, we had nothing. We want to find that out. We want to go back to our roots. And that's what Walt Whitman said when he described India not as Vishwaguru. We should always understand how people see. He never described us as Vishwaguru. He described us as the originatoress, feminine, Shakti, originatoress. Here comes the race of Brahma. This is how he described Indians. What wonderful magical words. But Sparsh technology, Sambandh technology, understanding that enlightenment is fundamentally about the ability to create Sambandh. I'll tell you one last story. Highly recommend that you go watch a video that my teacher, Professor Arindam Chakrabarti, and of course you were classmates with him, and Swami Sarva.
Friends of Amitabh
Yeah, he's my teacher. And Swami Sarva Priyananda, who is the head of the Vedanta Institute in New York, they have this remarkable YouTube video on Sambandh and relationships. And Swami Sarva Priyananda tells a story that, this guy is talking about duality and all that stuff, right? And the son says, even the cow understands that. The cow understands it is a cow and it is eating grass. There is a eater and there is a eaten. But you are something more than that. You are something more than that. And that ability, how between the inner breath and the outer breath, how to find that middle point. Find the middle point of dawn between night and dark. How to find that middle point between you and what you think is the adversary. That liminal space. All of those technologies we have failed abysmally in incorporating and in using. So this is as much a plea as it is an empowerment. Let's benefit from our cultural strength in figuring out how to deal with the world at a very foundational but very practical level. And sir, I will end by saying this. Yes, there are pitfalls to comparative study of anything. Anything. But there's also an exchange that happens. And Joseph Campbell, in The Power of Myth, a great series, draws heavily on India. And just listen to those stories. And last piece, Upanishad story, Upanishad text. Me, I'm a storyteller, I'm a Granthika. So there's this guy, his name is Ravan. You heard about Ravan? How many of you heard about Ravan? How many of you? All of you? Oh. All right. Now, this part you don't know. Do you know he was a Kashmiri Brahmin? You don't know. Pulastya was his father. Pulastya was based in Kashmir. So, I'm appropriating him. But he asked the same question. He said, what will make me happy? And his answer was, Shiv Tandav Stotram. That's the only answer. I rest now.
Thank you. Since it is a conversation, let me, I want to clarify. I did not mean to say that we should not compare. What I always feel that let me put before everybody whatever I know and what I have learned from my own thing. And if a comparison works, then it's fine. If it doesn't, to me it is okay. Now, since you talked of two very powerful ideas of Kashmir Shaivism, and the greatest philosopher or intellectual poet, dramatist that you could think of, at least in the last 3,000 years, other than my Kalidas, is Abhinava Gupta.
Yeah.
Now, Abhinava Gupta's, this you said, the sonic transaction, and you also mentioned what is called tactile transaction.
Yes.
This he talks in detail in his Tantra Lok. Now, Tantra Lok is a text which would take several lives, except some Kashmiri Pandits who had, imbibed it within half of their lifetime. He talks. Sambandha is actually the basis for understanding, particularly Trikatantrism.
Yes.
And that is, of course, related to Shiva. How do you connect yourself? And that sonic transaction, let me connect it straight, and which is Abhinava Gupta acknowledges. And I'll ask for your forgiveness and ask you to open your eyes or close your ears if you like. I'll just recite the Rigvedic mantras and then probably give you a few glimpses of what it might mean. Ya Atmada Balada Yasya Vishwam Upasate Prashisam Yasya Devaha Yasya Chayamritam Yasya Mrityuhu Kasmai Devaya Havisha Vidhema. There are 10 verses like this. This is a cry of a sage in the Rig Veda. In the 10th mandala, 121 sukta called Hiranyagarbha Sukta, otherwise translated as unnamed God. It is the only sukta or only chapter in the entire Rig Veda of 10 mandalas where there is no God. Now that is the one which is picked up. What it says is that it describes the God in 21 different ways and describes the gods in the sonic and tactile transaction. Sonic transaction, that is a cry. The cry is, the refrain at the end of each mantra is Kasmai Devaya Havisha Vidhema. To whom shall I offer my oblation? Since you invoked Bimal Krishna Matilal, he has a beautiful article at the end of which he concludes that article on mysticism and India. And he gives an example of the great philosopher Buridan and how Buridan wanted to convince the audience and visitors that his donkey was also a philosopher. And people started making fun of it, just like everybody does. He said, prove it to us. And then what he does, he says, place 2 buckets of grass of equal amount in front of my donkey and then see it. Now what happens eventually, this may be just a legend or maybe true, but legend more likely, as it goes in storytelling. The donkey starves to death without having to touch either of the basket. And that simply means that, when you begin to analyze which one should I pick up, and so this is at the kernel of the Rig Veda, that if there are Indra, there's hundreds of gods that are worshipped, but it is in this particular sukta that it is invoked, which is what Abhinavagupta says, if Shiva is to be the name of that particular thing. And since you invoke the aesthetics, Dhvanya Lok Lochan, there could be a no greater literary criticism in the world, and that I say with full confidence, at least, of reading two sections, English literary criticism and French literary criticism, where he talks about that this sonic interaction, gave me a better word, transaction. Because transaction is a little bit of give and take, but interaction. And this sonic interaction, he said that if you can create a sound without actually using your mouth organ, then Shivas will be able to chop your fetters. Because if you are fettered, you have this desperate desire to feel free. And that is what at the end that the Rig Veda, and he refers to this particular sukta, Abhinavagupta, but in a very, very different way. And I think those of you, Arindam is one very good example. He's writing a book on Abhinavagupta at the moment. So probably he'll come out with certain aspects of this tactile interaction or tactile transaction, let me say, TT and ST. And then probably we will be able to understand Abhinavagupta in more. And that emerges from Sambandha, relation. Because he was much more obsessed with defining Sambandha. He says Sambandho, everything is Sambandha. Everything is relation. And therefore, if you connect it to modern international relations, if you can understand your relation, you either are perished, you surrender, Chhap tilak sab chini, to se naina milai ke. Amitabh and I have a differing view on that. I simply said that this is a song which somehow orders you. Only if you abandon your identity, your name, your color, can you come to my camp. Or you can yourself be able to sing that I don't need anything to create my sambandha with Shiva and enlightenment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Before I move to Rakesh sir again, I think Dean sir wants to say something.
I just thought, I think this is a fascinating exchange. I'm glad it's being recorded for posterity, because I'm sure the next generations will greatly
जब हम लोग नहीं
benefit from
रहेंगे,
this
yeah.
conversation. But I thought you began with Whitman.
Yes.
And I thought that perhaps in my more earthly fashion, I'll draw another comparison, not a comparison, but I will draw on the experiences of another poet, and I'll play the last clip, which of course, again, Heeraman and I have talked about endlessly, and he uses words from the Upanishad, the Brihadarika Upanishad itself. So let me play that. That's in his own voice. If you can, sorry.
Voices cose nel fuoco che li affina. Quando vi muti Caledon.
Oh, swallow, swallow.
Le prince d'Aquitaine à la tour abolie. These fragments I have shored against my ruins. Why then I'll fit you. Hieronymo's mad again. Datta, Dayatvam, Damyata.
Shanti,
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 Shanti, Shanti.
This is, of course, from the Wasteland. Datta, Damyata, Adhyadam.
Yeah.
So, is this also part of that journey of learning from India? Eliot was, of course, a Nobel Prize writer born in Missouri in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, John Steinbeck, I can just go on and on. They have drawn, we can talk endlessly about Hollywood, how much Hollywood is indebted to Indian, The Matrix, you got Inception, you got Doctor Strange. The Legend of Bagger Vance was all about the Gita, the difference being instead of Krishna and Arjun, the Gone with the Wind. So, look, we have never really put our arms around it and tried to understand this tsunami. And now, of course, you got, the David Charmans of the world, Donald Hoffman, Rupert Spira. So, I'm not an appropriator. I am a Guru Nanak guy, spread the wealth, right? But I think being ignorant and not acknowledging and being cognizant of this. But because in the interest of time, I just want to just quickly leap to one other point I want to submit to you, because that's very contemporary. And of course, we have to talk about Donald Trump, because that's the number one problem in international, or challenge in international relations. And so right now, if you're an Indian or anywhere else, when you think of Donald Trump, the first thing you think about is reciprocal tariffs, right? And we have a little window where in the interview, Donald Trump and Fox said that when he told Prime Minister Modi about it, Prime Minister said, no, I don't like that. Of course, Donald Trump in the interview doubled down and said, no, India has the highest tariff nature. Okay, so let me step back a bit from that. And, this is not a school on economics, though that's a part of it. This is more about School of International Studies. This is such a profound change that's happening in America, that if this movement proceeds ahead and builds momentum, it will affect all walks of life. And you will see us moving to what I am putting on the table for the first time: Darwinian reciprocal humanism. So if globalization was symbiotic humanism, we are moving to a world of reciprocal humanism. Now, for those of you who want to do a PhD on it, the first thing I would recommend to you is go study the works of Jayanta Bhatta. Go do your PhD under Professor Tiwari. Because Jayanta Bhatta was this incredible Nyaya scholar.
Again, Kashmiri.
Yeah, and look,
I'm telling you.
I am I'm a recipient of great treasures. Why should I not receive them and share them, right? So, Jayanta Bhatta was a very remarkable person, and he wrote this book, Much Ado About Religion, Agama, of course, logic, but
other than his novels,
yeah,
dramas, this is yes.
Yeah. So he tries to handle this issue under this book, Much Ado About Religion, right? And he specifically deals with why a framework on morality is destined for failure, why a framework on just pure materialism is destined for failure, why a framework of reciprocal humanism has to be looked at in a certain way. So, in the interest of time, all I am going to do is say to you, there's a body of knowledge on the Trump issue too. And so please go study it and see what it tells you.
But just to add,
Yes.
in the same book, Much Ado,
Yeah.
Jayanta Bhatta also tells us
Yes.
how actually to recognize people
Yes.
and before making judgment.
Right.
Because his great sense of sarcastic interpretation of people's behavior
Right.
is something which is just the opposite of what he writes in his bouquet of
Yeah.
logic or reason.
Yeah.
And there he says, and he says that, and this is my concluding verse.
Yeah.
He says, "Kuto va nutanam vastu vayamut prekshutum kshamaha vacho vinyasa vaichitra matra matra vichartam." Where can I get you a new thing? Kutaha va
Yeah.
nutanam vastu vayam utprekshutum kshama. Where can I present you the new thing?
Yeah.
Therefore, whatever I am saying here, and that speaks for myself too, whatever I am saying here is nothing but a paraphrase of what has already been said. Which is why I have said that in terms of enlightenment, India really doesn't need to bother about it, right from the Rig Veda, whether you like it or not,
right.
until the Upanishad, and till, of course, Abhinavagupta puts a very, very high premium, which very few have been able to to actually take up that challenge. So in that context, I think that transaction is something which is not a bad idea, but that transaction has to be between you and you.
Yeah. So we are at Jugalbandi. I'm just going to make my last closing comments. The big opportunity. We have Professor Amitabh Mattu here, the Dean of the August Center. In a remarkable coincidence, there is a Mattu Center of Indic Studies at State University of New York.
He's given billions of dollars for that.
And so while you hear about centers being set up at Harvard and elsewhere, the fact is the center at Stony Brook, 20,000 Americans have taken a course there. So in terms of volume, the others are, very elite, PhD and all that, no impact. Strongly suggest that, and I'm happy to facilitate it.
Were you in the vice chair of the? No, that's the.
Indo-American Arts Council, but yeah, but
was Mattu professor.
Professor, yeah. And now we brought Staneshwar, Timal sir. But happy to serve as a facilitator because I was a contributor. Dr. Mattu is like my brother. But I really believe this center, that center should be engaged in something where we bring the best of American minds, best of Indian minds, and we engage.
There can be no better time than sonic connection Mattu and Mattu.
Right. And what should the engagement be? And I'm now going to make a small pitch. So I'm a storyteller. My last novel is a novel called Dawn. It's set in the year 3000. Penguin published it. And it presented a certain thesis. The thesis it presented was that modern society, now this is year 3000, but the whole idea is the author uses a premise like that to talk about the present. Modern society will be organized by three things: technology, philosophy, and storytelling. He who controls technology, philosophy, and storytelling will organize the world. And that's where we have both an opportunity and a threat. And our scholars, our fine minds, should be drawing upon our collective wisdom and saying, how do we prepare to play the next game? And with that, I will stop.
What a wonderful day. Well past 5, so
Yeah.
no questions time.
Before I,
You take 5 minutes.
yeah, 5 minutes. But before I pass on to the students, let me say something, sir. You have talked about all the Kashmiri, scholars and poets that I agree. But about Ravan, I have my, as far as I am concerned, that's what I heard, that he was actually from Greater Noida.
Let him have him! Let him have him!
So, नहीं, sir, seriously सीधा ही बता रहे हैं sir. वहाँ there's a village there known as Bisrak. That's a derivative of Vishrava, his father. So, and that village doesn't celebrate that Ravan Jalana on Vijayadashmi. So, मैं सोचा कि थोड़ा सा आपको add कर, मतलब I'm no one to add anything to your comments, but सर वो तो ये भी दिमाग में बना जी विश्रवा से विश्रक तो मैं
But I will counter that by saying, until the 14th century, and this is my first novel, The Last King of Kashmir, Ramchandra was the commander-in-chief of Kashmir who fought the external forces. His daughter was Kota Rani. His son was named Ravan. So we have historical evidence in Jona Raja that up to the 14th century, a noble Kashmiri family did not see any distinction between Ramachandra as the father and Ravan as the son. That is evidence. The rest is all stuff. Anyway, question time.
Thank you, sir. A maximum of 3 questions maybe, and no one is going to put any question to me.
And someone, you seem to be a regular question.
Okay.
Give someone else a chance.
I hope you won't mind. I hope.
I hope you won't mind me mentioning you as a Kashmiri Pandit. I'm from Eastern UP, and mentioning someone from a Telugu Pandit, if I can call, Jiddu Krishnamurti, who was declared the Enlightened One more than 100 years back, 1916, by the Order of the East, Annie Besant.
Yeah.
And yes, Madam Blavatsky, Colonel Olcott. But who denounced it
Yes.
by saying that enlightenment is illusory,
Yeah.
if not farce,
Yeah.
who said that organized spirituality
Yeah.
limits you and therefore is of no use, who said that truth and freedom are pathless, who said that no one can be a guru for another human. So what would you say, Jiddu Krishnamurti?
Yeah, so there's much to agree with that, and let me go through my framework. My framework says when you're born, you have only one birthright. That birthright is to have complete fulfillment and to have complete liberation. Liberation meaning freedom. Fulfillment meaning I want everything the world can give me, because we are worldly embracing. We are not Maya people, that this is illusion. That's our birthright. And so now the question becomes of how do you achieve that? The idea of becoming a Jivan Mukt, fully liberated while alive, fully fulfilled while alive. How do you become? And so look, it can be spontaneous, right? It can be spontaneous, and for those who are lucky enough that it's a spontaneous happening, great. For many, it's Merj Kashir, Mother Kashmir, meaning that nature is your teacher. And every aspect of nature becomes your teacher. For others, depending on your proclivity, there are infinite pathways. And the gurus see what your proclivity is, and they... Now, the first example of that is a hilarious one. Hilarious one. There was a king of Kashmir, and he had sons who were idiots. Real life problem of the question you asked? And the king was going out of his wits. What do I do? My kingdom will be destroyed. So he puts out a challenge and says anybody who comes. So this Kashmiri Pandit Brahmin comes and says, "Oh king, in 6 months, I will make your kids the smartest people on earth." King looks at him, says, "I don't believe it," because he knew his sons. So then this Pandit says, "If I don't succeed, you can humiliate me in the worst way that you can humiliate a Kashmiri Pandit." Now, you guys don't know that, but I will tell you because everybody is an adult. And this insult was actually maintained by this incredible culture of Kashmiris and heaped on Prime Minister Nehru when he came and they were upset at him. And what was this insult? This insult is, you turn around and you drop your pajamas and let that man that you're insulting have a scenic view. The king says, "Wow, you're prepared for that insult? Okay." So this guy takes the princess, and that's when the Panchtantra was born. Pandit Vishnu Sharma was the name of the Pandit, and he created this incredible collection of stories to teach you about life. Kashmir is one of the greatest birthplace of stories, and I would say the biggest teacher in life is our stories. Shivaji is Shivaji because of the stories his mother told him.
Except that.
And may I just finish? Sir, you'll have all the time. Sir, let me finish that. I have published a paper on this where I gave a talk at the University of Jammu. The most sacred thing about a people is not their scriptures, is not their religious preachers. It's their stories. You destroy and corrupt their stories, they are done. And that's why Hinduism survives, because in every village, they know their stories. Have I answered your question?
Yeah. Time for only 2 more questions, very short questions to either of the panelists.
Okay, sir. Yes, sir. My question, I am
Some other person. Okay. Mrs. Dhar has pleaded your cause. She's a very kind, gentle Kashmiri Pandit woman, so please.
Sir, I am Bishrit Das, PhD second year CWAS. My question is, when you talk about the...
CWAS, I didn't tell the full name.
My question is, sir, when you talk about Immanuel Kant, generally in the school, we talk about higher dimension, but Immanuel Kant is also the father of epistemology. And before entering SIS, I was a serious student of Indian history. So I want to know that how far we compare the Indian Upanishad and Western epistemology, because both possess the same kind of notion, that the inquiry, the knowledge.
The question is for him?
Yeah, quick, because I mentioned I invoke, but I just simply have 2 very quick answers. One, epistemology, if you ask me in the English Latin base name, that is one meaning. But if you read the Pramana Shastra, which flows forth from the Upanishads and comes from the 6 or 9 systems later on, more importantly when Buddhism or Buddhist logic comes up, then you discover that this Pramana Shastra is, in a way, and which is why I don't compare, is stronger in many ways than epistemology, because you look for an epistemic value of a statement or of a thing. Indian epistemology, as it is, for lack of any better word, we use it for Pramana Shastra, is something that is never satisfied with the epistemic value in itself. So the value of T on the basis of P has to be through something, and that something is what I'm referring back to, the relationship. What is the relation between a proof and that particular truth or proposition that you have made? So Immanuel Kant, of course, his epistemology is extremely enlightening. I'm using this word differently. But Indian Pramana Shastra, Indian epistemology is much more rigorous, because even within the tradition, in the Kantian tradition, you rarely find people questioning to that level. But here, the commentator of both Vaisheshik Sutra and Gautama's Nyaya Sutra themselves double down on them and establish another more refined version of that. So, but as I said, we may use different words, but the concepts could be similar. But I can't, resist the temptation. This Vishnu Sharma story that I have read it, this is a 15th century, 16th century story. This is not true, and this is not, as far I discovered it 30 years ago, that this doesn't happen among Kashmiri Pandits. But this is true that it is good fun to read it.
The story is more important.
Yeah.
The story is more important than the content, yes.
Let me just add to the comments. I completely agree with Professor Tiwari, but I will say one more thing. When we talk about knowledge, always remember, there is the Smriti Shakti knowledge, there is the Kalpana Shakti knowledge. Always remember that. And I owe it to Rumi, because I put it on the front page of my second book, Sell Knowledge by Imagination. And the technologies of Kalpana Shakti were developed in a way. Technology means a technique that works every time. Most beautifully by Abhinav Gupta as to how do you channelize your Kalpana Shakti for acquisition of knowledge. Because knowledge is not static. Knowledge is not rear view mirror. Knowledge is a frontier activity. That's the only addition to what he said.
And just to add to your about that very good question Pandit has left, you have to read Aurobindo in order to understand that aspect of Jiddu Krishnamurti. Without understanding Aurobindo, I think we're more or less contemporary and very different in their style of.
Aurobindo was slightly earlier.
But I think that's why it's more or less contemporary. Yes.
So we have time for another question. That will be the last question, and that will be
the last question.
Ritvik.
The mic is working, so I'll talk like this only. My question is simple. We have talked about epistemic inquiry and search for knowledge within the Indian knowledge system. But then Mimamsa and Rishi Jaimini tell us you don't need to search for knowledge, do as it is written. You don't need to apply your own thought process.
Where does he say Jaimini?
Rishi Jaimini says in the Mimamsa Sutra that Chodana Lakshana Vartho Dharma, do as
I know.
it is said.
No, Chodana Lakshana, I know what he says, Chodana Lakshana. What say that what is the index of that knowledge? Yeah, because he said he doesn't say that you don't search for it.
I am saying that when there is an imperative issued from authority to do something as it is dictated, then why do we need epistemic inquiry on our parts in the modern system? Because the Indian knowledge system is also saying that authority has already issued an imperative. So why search for epistemic inquiry amongst ourselves as Sir said, sovereignty of the individual?
I'll answer that in a very short way.
Why don't you come and speak in the mic?
Yeah, I've understood the question.
You repeat it because we're recording.
Basically, you're quoting Jaimini, why seek knowledge, right? So, question is, what is knowledge? And the answer, again from Kashmir, is very simple. Knowledge is that which takes your desire and turns it into fruits that you can taste. That's the purpose of knowledge.
And what you're referring to, you're talking about the Vidhi and Nishay, the among the 5 kinds of statements that you find in the Rigvedic tradition, and the Mimamsa is the tradition which simply talks about hermeneutics. How do you draw meaning out of sounds and words? And therefore, he says, he talks about 2, Vidhi and Nishad. But what about other 3 kinds? And it is there that you need Mimamsante anene iti Mimamsa, by which you actually discover the meaning from the words spoken. And again, he speaks, so arodit, yadarodit, tadrudratsya rudratam. How do you get the meaning of, say, silver? He said the Nisheda Vakya is Varhishis Rajatam Nadeyam. You should not offer silver as a gift in any ritual. That is the injunction or other prohibition. So this prohibition, how do you go about it? How do I satisfy myself that why should silver not be given as a gift? Which is also tradition now. Even poor people, they can't afford it. Even small amount of gold, they put it at the daughter's wedding if they can't afford it, because Rajat or silver is prohibited. Then he says, because when you discover, Rajat is, or the silver is considered to be the tears of the god Varuna. And therefore, and then we say this nishedha, this prohibition, even in the prohibition he looks for a meaning. Unless you get the meaning, you will not be satisfied with something that is told you not to do. And the same goes with the vidhi. So you are right up to an extent that it is already given and ordained by the Veda. But how do we look for a general public? So if you read the commentary after Jaimini, then you discover what actually it is that you're looking for.
Yeah, thank you, Heeraman sir. Thank you, Rakesh sir. It was a great pleasure sitting in between both of you, learning from you. Thank you, Dean sir, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. So I'll hand back the podium to Uma for the thanks formally.
Thank you very much.
I think we've had a very fascinating conversation, as the Dean said this afternoon. We've had profound insights from both the speakers as well as the moderator. And I'm certain that this discussion, this conversation will be discussed in JNU Dhabas over the next few days. I thank the moderator and the two speakers on behalf of the SIS as well as the organizing team of the Kunzru Memorial Lecture Series. I would also like to thank the audience, the students and members of the faculty for asking interesting questions and for being a very receptive audience.
And suffering us here at the 5 o'clock.
We hope to see you tomorrow morning at 11 for the session on Why Africa Matters. Thank you all once again.